Thank you, Jeff. Good afternoon. As Jeff explained, I conduct psychiatric research at Columbia University, but as Dana Hanover said, titles on a CV don't tell you why. And the story is simple in my case. As a child, I was fascinated by animal behavior, and then I watched an older cousin's life unravel because of schizophrenia. And then my best friend's father shot himself to death in a suicide attempt because of escalating bipolar disorder. So when I went to medical school, I decided I wanted to study human behavior and why it goes awry and how it goes awry, with a long-term goal of transforming treatments for mental illness. So I'm delighted to meet so many people today and to see so many people in this room who share my mission, because we're all on a mission. So I only have a few minutes to tell you something about women's mental health, and I'm going to focus on depression and anxiety for the reasons that I think will become clear. And there are 4 very important but quite sobering facts I want to tell you. So the first is that depressive and anxiety disorders are the most common mental illnesses in the world. 1/5 of us will have a depressive episode at some time in our lifetime, and anxiety disorders are even more common. Now, anxiety disorders, there are many different forms of anxiety disorders: social phobia, panic disorder, post-traumatic stress disorder, obsessive-compulsive disorder, or OCD, and others. But they're all characterized by fear and anxiety, and if you put them all together, more than 1/4 of us will have an anxiety disorder in our lifetime. Fact 2, depressive and anxiety disorders are much more common in women than in men, up to 2 to 3 times as common, depending on the disorder. And if that weren't bad enough, anxiety disorders often start in childhood and adolescence, and then what often follows is depression in late adolescence or early adulthood. And because these disorders start early, they don't just cause pain and suffering, they knock us off track, interfering with going to college, starting a family, developing a career. And a particular cruel version is when depression or OCD attacks the woman right after she's had her first child or a child, and it really is a devastating event for her, her baby, and her family. So fact 3, depressive and anxiety disorders don't just cause suffering, they actually can be lethal. And yes, I said lethal. So people are aware of the link between depression and suicide, which is just tragic, not only for the person who committed suicide, but for every person in the extended family network that loved that person. It's a pain I don't think that ever goes away. But it's not just depressive anxiety disorders that can cause suicide. Anxiety disorders on their own also can. And when anxiety and depression occur together, which happens a lot, the likelihood of suicide goes up. But unfortunately, I have to tell you about another aspect of how these disorders might also be lethal, and it's a bit more insidious. So we know our immune functions don't function as well when we're chronically stressed or anxious. We don't heal wounds as quickly. We don't mount as good a reaction to a vaccine. We also know that there's a very strong link between early psychological stress and the later development of chronic medical illnesses like cancer, cardiovascular disease, dementia, diabetes. So there's new data suggesting that chronic stress and anxiety might trigger a pro-inflammatory state in our bodies, and this may lead to premature cellular aging. And premature cellular aging in different body systems might actually be contributors to these chronic mental illnesses. So if this is so, then taking care of our mental health may be the key to taking care of our physical health. And the final fact I want to tell you is that, and it doesn't really make a lot of sense given the 3 I've told you before, that the public health impact of depressive and anxiety disorders is often under-recognized. These disorders are often dismissed by society. People with depression are told to cheer up or have a positive outlook on life. People with anxiety are told to chill or take a deep breath. Treatments that work, that we know work, are often hard to access in our medical system, and anxiety disorders in particular are often minimized, receiving less funding from research agencies like the National Institutes of Mental Health. But I see it very differently. These disorders are very common, they affect us early, and they can be chronic if they're not treated. That's the bad news. But the good news is, if we develop better treatments, we could have a profound impact on individuals and on society. And advancing research on depression and anxiety can have a profound effect on us women. So like Jeff, unfortunately, when you're in this profession for a while, you collect these stories. So I'll never forget the new mother who developed horrible obsessive contamination fears on the birth of her first baby, and she feared she'd contaminate her newborn, so she wouldn't hold it or nurse it. Or the 33-year-old mother with 3 small children who tried to commit suicide and almost succeeded with her shoelaces. I mean, what kills a 33-year-old woman? Not much, but depression and anxiety can. So when I look out today and I see this room full of beautiful and accomplished men and women, I am so inspired by your dedication and your interest in this problem of not only mental health, but also women's mental health. And I salute you for your courage and your wisdom, and your courage to stand up and fight against the stigma associated with mental illness. I mean, think about it. If a fifth of us are going to have a depressive episode and more than a quarter of us are going to have an anxiety disorder, everyone in this room knows lots of people with depression and anxiety. But I also admire your wisdom, because you've chosen not only a very important problem, but one in which is full of opportunity. Now, why do I say that? Well, half of the people with depression and anxiety, we have good treatments for them, and those treatments include both medications and psychotherapies, or both. And we at Columbia are at the forefront of developing those. So what's needed there is access and education. And for the other half who don't respond well to our current treatments, we're using the latest research tools like neurochemical imaging, genotyping, and animal modeling to ask a series of very important questions, like, how do our treatments work? And why don't they work for all? What causes these illnesses? And if we knew that, can we prevent them? And if we treat anxiety and depression, could we prevent premature cellular aging and really improve our physical health? So I want to end with a personal thank you to Gray Matters. As director of the Anxiety Disorders Clinic, I've had the great privilege of mentoring 2 outstanding faculty who've received your funding from Gray Matters. And I'm just going to ask them to stand. And Carolyn, I know you already stood, but if you stood again, I'm sorry. As Jeff told you, just hold if you would. As Jeff told you, Carolyn came to Columbia after getting her MD PhD from Harvard, and she's investigating novel treatments for OCD and hoarding. And then Suzanne Amari, I think you're here someplace. There she is back there. And Suzanne also came to Columbia after receiving an MD PhD from Stanford. And she's developing animal models of anxiety and OCD to determine how molecular and cellular deficits lead to brain circuit dysfunction. So with Gray Matters support, both developed innovative research projects that then attracted independent funding from NIMH. This is an enormous step in the highly competitive field of academic medicine, and Carolyn did it with twins on board. So I hope you're as proud of them as I am. You are looking at 2 future leaders in the field. Now, my point is, when you support research on topics central to women's health, like anxiety and depression, you have the power to transform women's lives. And by funding these women scientists, you've already transformed their lives. So like me, and like you, I can attest they're both on a mission to transform treatments for mental illness. And all of us working together, we can do it. Thank you.